Hello, this is Julie Tomkovic with our County to County Trainings Program, and I want to thank everyone today for joining us today for strategic planning. I'm just going to do a little housekeeping at the very beginning here. Remind people that our presenters today, we've got 3 folks, and so we're breaking the presentation up a little bit. Meryl Wolf is here to give you a little bit on the overview on strategic planning, and then Jim Bartow and Matt Hughes will be taking it down to kind of the county and the precinct planning level. So those are part 1 and part 2, and on backup support today, we've got Aaron Fry and Jenny McMillan, and I want to thank them both for joining us today. None of this would happen without everybody on board. Just a little reminder, if you have not already gone to the chat room, go ahead. You can find it at the square. Either move your mouse around or the touchpad, and you'll find a square that has the word more and 3 dots above it. Or you might see a little green cartoon bubble comes up. If you click on that, it'll take you over to the chat room. And if you would just type in your name and the name of the county that you're with. And just a reminder, keep your cameras off and your mics muted, and that makes the presentation go that much better. And I'm just going to double check that our record is on. Make sure that we see. Excellent. All right. And now I'm literally handing over the microphone to Meryl Wolf, and she'll take on to the first portion. Hold on just a moment.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Meryl Wolf. I'm happy to be here to contribute to this great series of webinars. I have worked for a number of years in with nonprofit organizations, primarily in the field of international development and reproductive health and rights. And one of the areas that I've worked on is with these organizations is strategic planning. So I have been asked to share some of that experience, and that's what I'm going to do today on the general topic of strategic planning in a way that I hope will be helpful with you. And I recognize that some of you may be very familiar with a lot of what I'm going to discuss, and it may be new to others of you. So hopefully what I'm going to share with you can be useful to all of you. So first of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what I am going to talk about, which is, again, just the basics of what strategic planning is, including why to do it and how to do it, and spent the bulk of the time talking about how to do it, some suggestions for an effective strategic planning process, as well as a tool that I have found useful. So we'll start with the basics. What is strategic planning? The answer is pretty straightforward. It's a systematic process of identifying priorities, setting goals and objectives, and defining tactics and activities to achieve them. Typically, strategic planning addresses 4 key questions. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? How will we get there? And how will we know we've succeeded? The strategic planning process can be fairly elaborate or fairly simple. It doesn't need to take tons of time or resources. Really, it's something that any organization can, and in my view, should do. So I want you all to feel encouraged about your ability to do this. You can definitely do it. As far as the why, this is also fairly obvious, I think, but it still bears repeating. The shorter answer is because doing strategic planning helps to optimize the likelihood of success and to make your organization or initiative more effective. More specifically, the strategic planning process helps an organization set direction, focus, and priorities. It lets everybody know what they should be working on and what they should be working on first. It gets everyone on the same page and ensures that all key players have shared understanding of the situation you're in, the challenges you face, and solutions and operational approaches. It also simplifies decision making, which I think is really important. It makes it easier to say no once you're in the course of implementing your plan to possibly important but ultimately distracting initiatives, and keeps you really on target. And writing a strategic plan and going through the exercise of creating one also really helps communication, both internally and externally, which creates more opportunities for you to get support and to maximize your success. Another way to understand why strategic planning is important is to consider what happens if you don't do it. Probably the surest way to fail is not to assess where you actually are and look at data, and instead to assume that you know everything, and to not set a clear goal and not set specific tactics and just kind of meander along and see what happens. That's generally does not it's not the most effective way to achieve what you want to achieve. Ultimately, if effective strategic planning addresses all of those possible pitfalls through a systematic and ideally inclusive and participatory process. Now to the how. There are many tools and processes that can be used for strategic planning. I want to acknowledge up front, and I'm going to talk about the one that I am most familiar with and that I have found useful. But all the approaches to strategic planning that I am familiar with share some key features, though they may use different terminology. And they all have their pros and cons, and they all can be used either more or less effectively. For this discussion, and for my recommendations, I've drawn a little bit on a strategic planning guide that the North Carolina Democratic Party issued in 2003, but mainly on my own experience working with nonprofit organizations. And the method that I have most experience with and recommend is called the Logical Framework Approach, or log frame planning for short. It's been used for decades in development and in other fields, and aligns with the 4 strategic questions that I mentioned earlier. The log frame process facilitates articulation of a logical set of interrelated interventions working toward a clearly defined goal. A key feature, and which I think is so valuable about it, is its emphasis on thoughtful participatory planning to ensure sharing of different relevant perspectives and development of true consensus and shared understanding and ownership of goals, strategies, and activities. Log frame planning is supported by use of a particular tool, the logical framework, or log frame itself, which I'd like to show you very quickly. This is the log frame grid, or matrix, which is simply a 16-cell matrix, which, when completed, includes and communicates all the elements of a strategic plan. The first column captures the program or the plan's key elements, and the other 3 columns capture how progress will be measured in column 2, where and how data on progress will be obtained in column 3, and in the last column, factors external to the program that could influence its success. The risk, or the flip side of that, assumptions. Sometimes this column is neglected in the process for lack of time, but I think it's a really important one because it involves planning for contingencies, and I'll address that a little bit more later. The log frame grid outlines a hierarchy of aims and represents an if-then logic depicted here. So starting from the bottom left, if you do certain activities and the conditions that you've defined in this risk or assumptions column hold, then logically the output or result that you have identified as an objective will be achieved. And going on up the matrix like that. If this is achieved, we do this, this is achieved, this holds, then it logically will lead to the successful achievement of your goal. The most important part of the planning process is captured in this first column, and with the goal, purpose, the outputs, and activities. And planning begins at the top of the pyramid outlined here. And I'll take a second to define the terms. Again, different strategic planning methodologies use different terminology, so just for consistency's sake, I want to clarify what I mean by these. The goal at the top of the pyramid is the higher level, often lofty objective toward which your program contributes, but it's not solely responsible for. So in the planning process, this is the first thing to get a general sense of, and it's usually fairly obvious. I'll talk a little bit more about what that might mean in our context in a second. The purpose is really the most important part in any strategic planning process. This is the specific impact that your organization is committing to make. And clarifying and getting full agreement and understanding on this is really the most important part of the process, in my view, because it drives everything else. And it's critical to take the time to get this right. The outputs, or sometimes called outputs or results, are what you identify as the main streams of work and related deliverables that contribute to achieving your purpose. And then the activities are the task that must be undertaken to produce the desired outputs. This is just a different depiction of that, which the log frame mountain, which I really like because it conveys the idea of each core component or sort of level of work discussion that I just addressed being really essential. If any element at any level of this mountain is missing, then the whole thing falls down. And you'll note also this column, there's an arrow on the left there of that graphic, which is a little bit hard to read, I apologize for, that is about level of control. As a planning entity, you have the most control over what's at the bottom of the mountain, the activities. I mean, you are in control of whether you do that or not. As you go up the mountain, you have a little bit less control because external factors and players also have exert an influence, so it's just something to bear in mind. As I said earlier, the way to approach planning using this tool is to start at the top and plan downward. You define the goal, then your specific purpose or impact, then what you will do to achieve that impact. But the very first thing to do is to convene the right group of people to constitute your planning group. Again, in my view, the real value of this approach is in how it's used, and the process is most effective when it's as inclusive and participatory as possible, and the right voices are included. So who should be involved? It's possible, I'll say up front, for one or two people to take this methodology and run with it and even to come up with a logical and maybe even fairly decent plan. But a plan developed that way will lack the insights and the legitimacy of one developed through a more inclusive and participatory process. Ideally, the planning process should represent all key stakeholders. In our case, everyone with a stake in the county party's success, including the groups listed here. Each brings important perspectives, knowledge, skills, and experience, and the support and involvement of each will likely be critical to success. You are going to know best from your context who are the right people to include. These are just some suggestions that actually were drawn from the guidance document the Democratic Party issued. It can also, just for the last three bullets there, it can also really be helpful to include individuals with specific relevant technical skill sets, such as fundraising, public relations, or digital communications. And also I might add sort of metrics and data. I think an ideal size is probably something like 8 to 15 people plus a skilled facilitator. But again, this is all going to depend on your specific circumstances, what your challenges are in the county, who is available. I'll emphasize again that the strategic planning process doesn't have to be a hugely time-consuming endeavor, which can be helpful when you're recruiting people to be involved in this process. And more important than the commitment of time is the commitment to be forthright and to listen to and to share ideas and to seek unity in working toward your shared goals. So once you've got that settled of who's going to be involved, it's time to get back to those 4 strategic questions. And beginning with the question of where are we now? But before you can begin defining your goal, purpose, and other elements of your plan, the first step is really to analyze your current situation. 2 processes that I have found helpful for this are an environmental scan and a SWOT analysis. An environmental scan simply consists of reviewing whatever pertinent data is available to you. For the purposes of elections, this could include local demographic data, voting trends, voter profiles, maybe economic data, anything that you need to understand how your party, your candidates, and your key issues are situated, and factors that could influence voter behavior. If time and resources permit, you can also do key stakeholder interviews on how the county party is perceived, how candidates and issues are perceived. So that's another option for getting that data. For our purposes here, and I think Jim and Matt are going to talk about this later, another important reference in is the election cycle calendar, which details benchmarks related to the election itself and to the county party's responsibilities, and again helps clarify your context and what you need to be achieving. A SWOT analysis is something that many of you are probably familiar with. It's used in many contexts. It's simply a tool and a process for identifying and prioritizing for attention both internal and external factors that can influence a success. That is, that can both facilitate or threaten success. It is a simple but I think a very powerful exercise, the results of which are typically captured in a grid like this. The process just begins with brainstorming factors in each of these categories. Internally, what are some strengths and weaknesses that we should pay attention to or can capitalize or need to address? And externally, what are opportunities and threats that require attention? And then after brainstorming that, and that means just naming them, going on to discuss and debate them before reaching consensus on those that are most important to address and later how. The 2003 document that I mentioned earlier from the Democratic Party includes a good list of topics to consider in terms of internal and external factors for county parties, which could be a good reference. They include things like, for internal factors, financial status, resources available, such as office space and equipment, donor base and fundraising mechanisms, communications mechanisms. And external factors, it could be things like status of voter registration, history of voter turnout, demographic transitions. These are some good suggestions, and I do encourage you to look at those, but also not to feel bound by them. I mean, this is really an opportunity in a SWOT analysis to be creative and to think quite broadly as you identify what your situation is. Once a situation analysis is complete, you've usually had enough discussion and have a pretty good idea of the key needs and issues that you need to move ahead on to address the second strategic question, which is, where do we want to go? Reflecting on the situation assessment and the SWOT, the next step is to define an overarching goal, an outcome for which your organization and others are working. In our context, this might simply be getting Democrats elected, or it might be you're getting control of the General Assembly. It's not essential to spend a lot of time fine-tuning this one. I think we all know we're kind of moving in the same direction. What's more important is to spend time getting your specific purpose or objective just right for your party. This is going to differ among parties, reflecting different sizes, demographics, and local political situations. For a blue county, for example, the objective might be to increase turnout over the last election. For a purple, it might be to flip the district, and for a red county, it might be just eroding the margin of victory for Republicans. Again, the paths to achieve each of these different objectives are going to be different. You need to define a purpose that you can achieve, and you need to define one particular to your circumstance. It's really, again, I want to emphasize, it's really important to spend enough time on this to ensure that all stakeholders fully understand and support your county objective. In my experience, it can be really helpful to have a skilled facilitator help these conversations, and to devote enough time for all ideas to be heard and for the wording to be really fine-tuned. After you define your overall objective, the next step is to identify key strategies for achieving your aim. So you want to define the most important streams of work necessary in terms of the log frame mountain, what must be done or risk not achieving the desired impact and having the whole mountain fall down. This often involves thematic synthesis. You can see in that picture that sticky notes often come in handy when you're trying to bring together a lot of ideas into some coherent streams of work. It's generally recommended, for the sake of a manageable plan, that you have maybe 3 to 6 outputs, in my terminology, or main streams of work and deliverables. And so in our context, it might be something like increasing voter registration overall, or winning particular races, or strengthening volunteer recruitment and engagement. Again, it's going to depend completely on what your situation is. Typically, in plans that I've seen and helped develop, 1 or 2 outputs focus on sort of internal issues around organizational effectiveness, maybe systems and processes so that your organization works most effectively, but most of them are focused on sort of the external impact that you want to achieve. And so once you've defined these streams of work and the deliverables associated with each of those, moving down a level in the mountain, again, you define the specific activities and tasks that it'll take to deliver the result. And this is, again, where you might want to talk about risk and assumptions, because identifying those can really influence what you want to do. You know, for example, if one of your goals is to increase voter turnout and there are active voter suppression efforts underway, you might want to do something to counteract those. And then to the final question in the process, how will we know we succeeded? The next step is to think about measuring progress, thinking about what is important to measure, how and where you're going to get that data, and then most importantly, how you're going to analyze it and use it. It can, again, be helpful to have somebody with experience in data and metrics, but the key thing is to measure only what you need to know if you're succeeding or if you need to change course, and then actually to use that data. And there are a lot of ways to do this. You can get creative. You can have quantitative and qualitative measures, and their quantitative ones are numbers of voters registered, for example, and maybe broken down by age or ethnicity or other characteristics. There are, while there is scope for some process indicators, for example, how many get out the vote activities you have, what's more important is the impact. Those are the indicators of what you're actually achieving rather than just what you're doing. And this slide shows an example of what a kind of a completed log frame grid looks at. And as I said, it's kind of a handy thing to have in all the information in one place about what you're going to do, what you're aiming to achieve, and how you're going to measure it. You can also, of course, have other narrative documents, but this log frame matrix does serve as a nice, concise summary. And what's important, though, once you've got this, obviously this is not it's not just done and you tick it off and you ignore it. It's a living document meant to be used. Once you're implementing it, you want to be checking back to see how you are doing and whether situations have changed, whether you need to modify either your tactics or the plan itself. So if I could offer just a few takeaway messages, they are these: that really it is important to take and to make the time to plan. As the adage goes, failure to plan does equal planning to fail, and I think that's true. Again, and this is, I can't overemphasize this enough, the participatory inclusive process is essential for getting the best ideas that you can, for getting buy-in, for getting full understanding so that you can implement a plan effectively. I think these 4 strategic planning questions, again, you might see them articulated in slightly different ways, but I think these do get to the basic issues that you want to think about and address. And then again, to make this a living plan, to use it, to share it, and to let it help you along your way towards success. I'm just going to suggest a few other resources here. This first bullet is the document that I mentioned that is a little bit old now, but it's got some very solid information in it, and I think it can be helpful. I did just Google quickly and saw that there are a number of county parties do have some strategic plans on the website. I didn't look at them in depth, but you might be able to find others. And there are many other, of course, planning resources about strategic planning in general on the web. And I think Jim and Madam now are going to give you some more great context on really what this means for us and making it less abstract. So I think that's it for me. I hope this is helpful. And, again, this is just about involving the right group of people and thinking clearly through those 4 key questions to come up with a clear roadmap for action and success. It's something that anyone can do. I've seen these good plans done in half a day or taking up to 6 months. It doesn't have to be a big, huge thing. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So thank you, and I wish you all good luck in your plans and in the elections.
Thank you so much, Meryl. I'd like to introduce myself. I am Jim Bartow. I'm the immediate former chair of the Orange County Democratic Party.
And I am Matt Hughes. I was Jim's predecessor in Orange County and currently serve as the second vice chair of the State Democratic Party and town commissioner in Hillsborough.
If you're a brand new county party chair, you have actually survived a couple of months already. You know, a lot of people describe it as drinking out of a fire hose. And there is just so much that can be and needs to be done. There's all the things that you want to do, and then all of the things that you want to do, then that you have to do. And it always seems to be something coming over the horizon that was expected or not expected. So the process of carefully evaluating where your county party is going and how to get there is critical for every single county party. And that quote, by failing to prepare, and by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail, is one of many wonderful quotes by Benjamin Franklin. So one thing is to have a plan so that you know what's coming, but a strategic plan is also a great opportunity to do team building in your county party. If you prepare together as a team, you'll be the team together when the situations arise. So what you should do is develop your strategic plan, create it with your executive board, create it at least with your executive board. There's all kinds of different ways to do it, but don't do it by yourself. And then get it approved by your county executive committee. This way, everybody gets some buy-in, everybody feels part of the process, and they have buy-in. And when there's situations arise, you all together, you all know what you're trying to accomplish, and you all feel part of the team. And then you have a great document to share with your donors and significant stakeholders. The first thing you should do is you should start with a calendar. When we send out the recording of this webinar, we're going to send a terrific calendar that I believe Matt put together that talks about everything that you have to accomplish over the next almost 2 years. Certainly everything between now and the election in 2020. But you should think about every single possible activity that needs to happen in the months before every single milestone, so that you know that you make your event successful. For example, if you're thinking about a municipal election, you got to start thinking probably about now, if you haven't done it already, about do we need to find people who will run for municipal elections? But then, you know, the next thing you know, you should be planning perhaps for poll greeting. And so you think about, you know, getting your volunteers, stepping it back, you know, who's going to put the sample ballots or slate cards together, or are you going to have a voting guide, or just who's going to bring tables to which early voting site or which precinct?
And on that point, it's important to be thinking ahead of a lot of these things. For example, if we're concerned about voter protection, really the conversation or the process on voter protection occurs now, because pretty soon county parties will be nominating folks to serve as precinct judges and chief judges. And so if you're concerned about having quality people at the precinct level who are going to, of course, uphold the law, but, you know, making sure that we have quality folks, especially when it comes to implementation of voter ID and other things. So really a lot of these conversations happen, or a lot of these things really you have to be thinking out pretty far in advance. The things that you really need to do is develop the specific short-term and long-term goals of the county party. Of course, you know, thinking about it in terms of 2-year cycles, that makes the most sense because that overlaps a lot with your officer terms, as well as that's typically the campaign cycle. But then also, you know, you might have some longer-term goals that the organization has, you know, committed to. Maybe having a owning a headquarters might be a long-term goal, and you might not be able to achieve that in a 2-year cycle. But that it's something that you'd like to do. Identifying the resources that you need to achieve those goals. My favorite thing is always, though, emphasizing resources does not equal money. It could be other things as well. So you might need money to implement some of these goals, but at the same time, you might need people, or you might need materials or trainings, or anything really. What you have to define what those resources are, and the tactics that you're going to use to implement those goals. Really, it's important to remember that with a strategic plan, you don't just write it, go through all those stages, get the buy-in, get the stakeholders' support, and then put it on a shelf. You really do have to go back and regularly assess whether or not you're meeting those goals. And that's why it's so important for those goals to be measurable, and also, to affix a time by which you want to achieve that goal. And, make a plan. Maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's monthly, to review that strategic plan. And it's okay also to go through and revise it. Strategic plans can and should be a living document. And then once you do it once, it makes it easier for the next time you do a strategic plan to really revise it, and rather than reinventing the wheel. It's important to set goals and establish what those are. For example, and this is a really easy one, we want to register 200 new Democrats at a local college. And so this takes the goal and then really breaks it down into also the tactics. So what are we going to do to register those 200 new Democrats at the local college? It's setting up a registration table. It might be at an athletic event. It might be identifying potential leaders. So if you have a really good relationship with maybe the College Democrats chapter on campus, there's all sorts of things. Of course, something that's not mentioned here, but is a big thing here in Orange County, is Fall Fest, when all the students come in and before classes kick off. So that would be a very easy way to do that. So really identifying what your goals are and setting up how to tackle them.
And also with every activity, it's always an opportunity to hand that off to somebody who wants to take on some leadership role. Every event is an opportunity for someone to get engaged and to become a leader in your local county party. And again, when you go back and review your previous plans, go ahead, make sure you look far ahead and see what's coming down the pike, and if there's anything you need to be doing now or in the next month to be ready for that. The most important thing to keep it structured is that you really need to have measures for your goals. You need to measure them because otherwise they'll just get too abstract and just sort of esoteric. And it helps you to plan your goal if you measure it. So what is the measurement of the goal? How are we going to measure it? Specific, metrics, things that you're going to accomplish. How do we plan on measuring it? When the timeline for the goal has passed, that's the time to gather up your measures and review how it went. And part of reviewing how it went is, how well did we come up with measurements of this goal, and how do we use it, and how do we plan it? Another thing to think about is that between now and 2020, we're going to have a couple of elections. We're going to have the municipal elections that are coming up fast, 4 months away before early voting starts, and then the primaries shortly thereafter. They're great opportunities for training people, getting people used to how to do things during an election, and testing what your plan was. And I'd also like to point out that municipal elections and primaries are great opportunities to grab volunteers. Usually municipal elections and primaries are really where the hardcore Democrats come out, and it's a great time to grab them and get them engaged.
So the things that you really need to consider when you're drafting this plan, and really to be clear, you have the strategic plan, but you also have these other things that will help you in your strategic planning process. You need a budget. You need to know how much money you have, how much money you need to raise, and really break it out by line item. To not have a budget really isn't good, because you need to know and plan for the things that it takes to run a county party, but that will be able to be a good guide for the strategic plan. You also need to make sure that you take into account fundraising. I don't think necessarily your strategic plan is a fundraising plan. I mean, that kind of informs you as well, but your fundraising is going to be critical to implementing your strategic plan. Whether you have an office, printing materials, all of those sorts of things, it's very, very important, and you're going to need a good financial foothold. You also have to think about the various ways you communicate. So is there a digital strategy? Are you having meetings? What's the way you're getting your word out to the public? But also, what are you doing internally for communication as well is very important. Volunteer recruitment, you do need to help folks get involved in the party, but you don't want it to be a lot of work for folks. You definitely want it to be so that it's fun, that it doesn't feel like work. We work all the time, or a lot of us do, so it doesn't want to feel like another job. So anything you can do to pull people in and make it fun is great. You also need to keep in mind, get out the vote. GOTV, which I used to think was actually a channel on TV, but GOTV, what's the timing? What are the strategies and objectives you're going to be using? So when are you going to start knocking on doors? How far out from the election is that? What are your goals? Maybe it's that you need to turn out, 2,000 more Democrats to flip a county commissioner seat, and really laying those out. And then also staffing the polls. Like I said earlier, thinking far enough in advance about what voter protection looks like. You're getting ready to nominate judges to serve with the Board of Elections. But you also need to make sure you have poll greeters. Poll greeters are not just to put a palm card in your hand as you're going into the ballot box, but it's also a way to do additional voter protection. If you train those folks up well, they can really be your eyes and ears on the ground on election day and during early voting. And the other thing that really is important is something else that's not mentioned here, which is poll observers. Going ahead and planning for poll observers will be very, very critical in 2020.
We are also going to be having something new in 2020. It's called photo ID. So, for example, something to consider is, when people come out of the poll and didn't have a photo ID, how are you going to get these people up to your local Board of Elections to get their picture taken so that they can get a photo ID and come back and vote? Everybody wants to drive people to the polls. Maybe you can consider people driving people from the polls up to your Board of Elections to get their picture taken. All they need to have is the last 4 digits of the Social Security and their face to get their photo ID. So that's the kind of thing that you can start to think about now. And if you start thinking about now, you can start to get people excited about what you're doing as a county party. And maybe you can get people who will take on some of these roles. And then they'll become leaders of the party for the future. Some more things to consider along that same line is what kind of committees do we want to have? If you can think about, if you're looking at the whole plan, maybe you can be thinking about all the different committees that will help you put together to implement your plan over the next year and a half to 2 years. What kind of committees? Who would be a good person to lead this committee? How many people do you think they would need to have on this committee? I mean, some committees may be small, but some committees may be actually larger. And you also need to be planning for your precincts. What kind of precinct meetings do you have? What kind of precincts do we need to get organized? How are we going to get those organized? Maybe if it's, each precinct is a little bit different, and maybe the precinct around the local school is a little different than the precinct out in farmland. And also you need to be thinking about your county conventions. What do you need for your county conventions? Where is it going to be held? What kinds of materials are you going to need? Are you going to have a speaker? A lot of times it's hard to get speakers. Maybe it's good to talk to Matt 6 months earlier and say, would you be willing to be a speaker at our event? And as always, candidate recruitment and coordination. Talking to your candidates is always a great idea. What do they plan to do? What do they need? How can they help you out? Maybe if you don't have a lot of volunteers, but candidates have people at the polls, maybe you can convince a candidate to hand out their literature as they're going in, but asking people as they come out if they were successful in voting or if they had a problem. So there's all kinds of things to think about with a strategic plan.
Well, I think also it's important to know that when you do the strategic plan and you've done what Merrill suggested earlier, which is a SWOT analysis, that's very important because it does allow folks and it allows you to really build in those contingencies. So candidate coordination is an important one. So when you do your SWOT analysis, we know every presidential year we're going to have a presidential campaign that comes in. And in some ways, that's a threat. It's something you cannot control. It's external, and it depends on whether or not that candidate wants to work with local parties. So in my situation, having done 2 presidential campaigns, we found the Obama campaign was not as easy of a partner as one would hope. That was not the case with the Clinton campaign, and I think that came down to candidate style and how candidates view the party. And so when you build that into your strategic plan, you're not going to get knocked off that you really were thinking about or relying upon a campaign coming in to help you out a lot. Or you may be in an area of the state where the presidential campaign's not actually working out of, and that might be true of a lot of smaller counties, a lot of rural counties. So when you build out the strategic plan and go through that process, you can really identify where are your opportunities, where are your threats, where are your weaknesses and strengths, which spells out SWOT. So that's really important. And then also I also like to think about things and not in terms of committees. I know we put committees in here, but really also in terms of working groups, things that if it can be less formal, if you don't need a super formal structure, I think it's more nimble for folks to be able to navigate and more action oriented. I think a lot of people, when they hear committee, they think of something that's really static and strict. So you really want to give people a lot of flexibility. So identifying what kinds of working groups you need is very important. And I also want to throw out 2 things that I think strategic planning can really help with. And I think they go hand in hand, which is when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So a strategic plan allows you to actually identify what your priorities are. And the other is when it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And so if you have a strategic plan, you can delegate who's going to do what, who's going to lead it, and really make sure that you're flagging the things that you really need to or want to work on. And it's easier to identify people who can lead certain initiatives. It really shouldn't just fall down to the chair and the officers to do everything. And if you can build out a good team and really build some value, that's really important. One of the things through our strategic planning process here in Orange County that really, really helped was identifying something we can specialize in so that when we do get those national campaigns coming into town, we've got value and they want to work with us. And so what we did was we built a really good data operation, which now works with county to county and a lot of different initiatives. And when the Clinton campaign came in, they worked with us hand in glove. And so those are the sorts of things that I think a strategic planning process can really help you with.
So just to overview, you want to have a plan for your strategic plan. You want to get people engaged with the strategic plan all the way through the process, starting with your executive board, but make sure that you have your county executive committee approve your strategic plan, and then you have a plan to share with stakeholders, something to show donors so that they are willing to give you money, because donors like to have a specific reason for giving money. And it's fun. I mean, politics is a social activity. Coming together for a strategic plan is a social event and something that they can really work well to build your county party. Are there any questions?
Oh, we've got questions here. This is an easy one. I'm going to ask this one first. How do we move party and candidates beyond resolutions and platform? And that's very, very important. You have to know what you believe in and what you stand for. But in order to do so in and of itself, that's another plan that occurs. But we cannot always be stuck on those things. I think the way that we move the party beyond platform and resolutions is definitely winning elections. Right now, for the last 10 years, this has been something about what we want to do, but none of it matters if we don't win elections. And so we did that by electing Governor Cooper and breaking the supermajority in both chambers, but now we have to take the majority in both chambers. And so that's really, I believe, how we move beyond it. Now, those things are important because we need to tell people what we believe in and what our priorities will be if we have the tools to govern. But we can't spend so much time doing that and neglect the other things that we need to do, such as knocking on doors, making phone calls, getting people to come out and vote.
Also, with issues can sort of take away from your mission. I always start off by saying the mission of the county party is to run efficient elections and then get Democrats elected, the nominated Democrats elected to vote. And one of the things I would always say is, let's talk about values, not issues. Politics is always an additive activity. You really want to be adding people, all the time adding people. Issues tends to divide people. So everybody is interested in issues. That's why they get involved. And you basically want to make sure people have that opportunity to do that. But really you want to try and steer it towards values. There's lots of different ways that we can do healthcare, but we all want to have good, affordable healthcare for everybody's family. So that's one of the things that's one of the ways that I work on that. The next thing is, how do you maximize participation? Have fun. I mean, that is the big one. You always want to be thinking about ways to have fun. People actually have fun when they're planning something like a social media campaign or a fundraiser, or how we're going to get this piece of literature out, or how we're going to maximize the vote in precincts. But basically that is the biggest way to maximize participation is to figure out how to have fun. The second one is food. Matt, do you want to talk about that?
About food or about fun?
Maximizing participation.
I think the biggest way you also maximize participation is honestly giving people something to do, and taking people up on their offer to help. If someone registers with you to vote and then says, I want to volunteer, identifies that they want to volunteer, and they never hear from you, or you finally contact them 6 months later, they might not be interested anymore. So if you want to maximize engagement, you've got to strike when the iron's hot, when they've got the time, or they will move on. And I think that's one way you also lose a lot of volunteers.
The next question is, which IDs are sufficient verification to vote? That's something actually I'm working on with a bunch of other people in a fun way in Orange County. Let's see if I can rattle them off here. The first and most important one is obviously a driver's license is all you need. It's not the address on the driver's license. When you register to vote, the only ID that you need is the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. You can put your driver's license on there, but when you're registering, all you need is the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. Photo IDs aren't important for the municipal elections, but coming with the primary election in February and March, you definitely need a photo ID. So that is the driver's license. Passport works, but people don't always want to be carrying around their passports. There are some ones that are less common, such as tribal ID and military ID. But if someone doesn't have a photo ID, again, the easiest thing is to just go to your Board of Elections. I'm sure it's in your county seat. You just show up. I saw Matt did that in Facebook. He posted on Facebook. All you need is the last 4 digits of your Social Security in your face, and then you get a photo ID that's good for 10 years.
And we also had another question about photo ID, and will it be required for the 2020 primary? And the answer is yes. You will need a photo ID to vote in the 2020 primary. So definitely keep that in mind, because primaries now occur in March and not May like they were historically. And so you have really even less time. Will they be required in this year's municipal election? The answer is no. We also have another question about how to build a voter list, and that's really important piece to your strategic plan. And for no other reason than you need to identify the demographics of the county or how your registration breaks down and everything. The easiest way to do that is through a program called Vote Builder. Many of you are probably familiar with Vote Builder. It's really a dynamic list that is, while not in real time, it's updated, I believe, monthly. It does contain a lot of information on voters beyond what the State Board of Elections provides, because the National Party has actually collected a lot of data on folks, and so we have scores for likelihood to volunteer, likelihood to vote Democrat, who lives at the home of the person who's registered. I mean, there's a lot of data there that's really important. If you don't have access, and everyone should have, if you are with a county party, you definitely need to identify who your county vote builder administrator is. It might be your county chair, it might be someone else, and certainly get that access. If you are at the county level and no one in your county has vote builder, then you certainly do need to reach out to the State Democratic Party at support@ncdp.org and make sure that you're set up. And if you have any technical issues as well with Vote Builder, that's an important one. I think it's important to also, one of the questions is how to move past the way things have always been done. Things change, things become antiquated. I think a lot of the times we have fundamentals in organizations such as the Democratic Party that you have to do, but how you do them can and should change. One of the things that I had here in Orange County is we had 6 different databases for all sorts of things, whether that was our email system, our website, how fundraising was done, which was usually on an Excel spreadsheet, all the system for collecting donations, everything was in its own little wheelhouse, and we decided to bite the bullet and merge all those databases into one program, and that was really, really tough. And folks said that we've always done it this way, and so you really shouldn't be afraid to change how things are done.
When I was an executive corporation, I always had something that I called jujitsu managing or bullfighter managing. And that is, you sort of use somebody's momentum to change their direction. So if somebody is saying to you, this is the way it's always been done, your question should be, oh, why did you do it that way? How did that work? How did that didn't work? Did it work in every way you wanted it to? And then you're sort of showing that you're listening to them, and then you can basically start to introduce your own more modern ideas into the process.
Another question that we got is, how do you engage non-voting registered Democrats? And I think the biggest thing is, whether they're non-voting or voting, you really need to engage with people. And I think that's very important. I think that one reason we see folks who should be voting or should be voting Democrat not doing so is because we're not going out and asking what's on their mind, and really giving them the respect that they deserve and asking for their vote. And I don't believe that we can ever just assume that we're going to have people, or that the candidate on the other side is just so terrible that, you know, how could you not vote for Hillary Clinton, for example, going back to 2016. So I really think we have to go out there. And I think that's very important with a lot of our constituency groups, whether that's African-American voters, young voters, Latino voters. We really do have to go out and make public engagement a more central piece, and not just within the confines of an election. But when you engage with folks, I think that that's a good party building exercise. It gets you people to your precinct meetings. It gets people to be donors, to volunteer, maybe to lead initiatives. And that's very important, because also, all of us are very motivated in the Democratic Party. We see the intrinsic value in what we do. But just like a lot of things like social media and stuff, we can build an echo chamber around us. So when you engage folks and bring them into the party, you certainly are adding, that diversity of thought that's really important.
The social science behind engaging non-voting registered Democrats is not to shame them, not to say people died to give you your right to vote, but to say, we are all voters. Everybody votes. We all, and sort of say, we're all going to go vote. And one thing that we're starting to use here is that we're all going to want to vote in this upcoming presidential election. Perhaps if they're not registered, you want to get registered to vote so that you can participate in this upcoming presidential election. There's going to be lots of people to vote for. Everybody's got their favorite. People like horse races. And one of the ways to get people engaged is to say, we're all going to want to vote in this upcoming presidential election. We all got our favorite, and that we're going to want to vote for. And one interesting thing about getting people to vote for the upcoming presidential election is only Democrats are going to be having a presidential election. Any more questions? Okay. Is there any success story involving good planning that we would like to share?
I certainly think that, having good planning really is important, and not just in terms of strategic planning, but all the other sorts of plans that you need to come up with as a county party leader, whether it's get out the vote, voter protection, fundraising. Those are all very important pieces, because you've got to really know where you're going. When I became a county party chair, we didn't have a strategic plan. We had to cobble one together pretty quickly. I came in midterm, and that was really helpful, because at least it said where we were going to go through 2016 or through the 2012 election. I think that one of the things that I think was very successful, though looking back, I probably didn't even acknowledge it as a strategic planning session, was actually having 400 people show up after the 2016 election when I was only planning for about 100 because people wanted something to do. And we had a lot of working groups that basically started coming together to form various plans for the Orange County Democratic Party on specific issues. And County to County actually came out of that meeting. And so folks were really, really interested and really excited. And I think really what happened was, and the way County to County came to be, is people realized that in our little bubble here in Orange County, we're critical to statewide, but we've got to start winning across North Carolina. And so wherever we could help put the proverbial boots on the ground, we certainly wanted to do that. So I think that was perhaps a very good success story involving planning that really helped Jim out a lot when he became chair and really gave us meaning and purpose for the next 2 years.
And also, we called it anger into action. And it was I remember it was a kind of cold, rainy Sunday afternoon, and there was a UNC basketball game going on, and all these people showed up. County to County was one. The other one was our social media group. People were interested in that. And the one thing I'll say from both the social media group and County to County that I've heard again and again, it's like people saying, oh, I am so glad I found you people, because working together, I don't feel quite so bad about what's going on. I feel like I'm making a difference. And that, that I have something that I can do and not just be angry or throw my remote at the TV. So again, party building is always addition, and it's always having fun. For more County to County information or questions, please email Julie Tomovic or Jenny McMillan about County to County webinars at c2ctrainings@orangedems.com. And that's our program. I'd like to also thank Julie and Jenny for putting together such a wonderful program as the County to County training group.
Great speakers and slides. Looking forward to your report.
Right.